Why were you never the same after your honeymoon? My wife Elena and I surfaced from our scuba dive to find ourselves alone in the middle of the ocean. Where's the boat? Elena screamed, ripping out her regulator. I spun around frantically, realizing the dive boat that had 18 people on it 5 minutes ago was completely gone. They left us, Elena gasped. They actually left us in the middle of the ocean. The worst part was that we'd booked the cheapest dive shop in rural Colombia. Cash only, no reviews online, and the dive master barely spoke English. He never did head counts, and we were the last group in the water. They'll come back when they realize we're missing, Elena said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. The current was already pulling us further out to sea. We had no emergency radio because the cheap shop didn't provide them. I tried waving my bright yellow safety sausage above my head while Elena blew her whistle repeatedly, the sound pathetically small in the vast ocean. Which way is shore? Elena asked, treading water beside me. I looked around at the identical horizon in every direction. I have no idea. We had maybe 4 hours until sunset. After that, we'd be invisible in the dark water. The first hour, we picked a direction and started swimming. Elena kept apologizing about choosing the cheap dive shop, saying we could have spent the extra $200 for the reputable one. My legs started cramping after 20 minutes, sharp, stabbing pains with every kick, but I kept going. Are we even moving? Elena gasped between strokes. Everything looks exactly the same. The worst part was she was right. The waves, the sun, the endless blue. We could have been swimming in circles and we'd never know. Then Elena started shivering despite the warm water. Why am I so cold? This doesn't make sense. That's shock setting in, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Just keep swimming and we'll be okay. I promise. The second hour was when Elena saw her first hallucination. She suddenly started screaming and waving at empty water. There! A boat! I see a boat! Help us! She started trying to swim toward nothing. Baby, there's nothing there. Yes, there is. Look, they're coming this way. I grabbed her arm, and she fought me for a moment before the mirage dissolved, and she realized she'd been screaming at waves. The look of despair on her face when she understood there was no boat broke my heart. The thirst had also become unbearable by then. Our tongues were swollen, lips cracked and bleeding from the salt. Every swallow felt like broken glass going down our throats. Just one sip of seawater, Elena begged. Just to wet my mouth, I can't stand it. When I told her that would kill us faster, she actually tried to drink it anyway. I had to physically hold her arms while she sobbed and begged for just a taste of water. The third hour, Elena's legs stopped working. She said she couldn't feel them anymore, they were just dead weight pulling her down. I had to support her entire body while treading water, my arms screaming in agony, legs cramping so badly I was crying from the pain. That's when the jellyfish got to us. I didn't see it, but I certainly felt it. Before I knew it, a fire-like pain was erupting across my shoulder. Elena screamed as a jellyfish also caught her arm. The jellyfish swam away, but we couldn't treat the sting. We couldn't do anything except keep swimming with venom coursing through our bodies. Elena went limp after that. Her eyes rolled back, and she mumbled something about leaving her behind to save myself. I slapped her face gently at first, then harder when she didn't respond. The waves had gotten huge, constantly washing over our faces, salt water flooding our noses and lungs. By the fourth hour, Elena was completely unconscious. I held her head above water, but my strength was failing. I kept losing my grip, watching her slip under before pulling her back up, each time taking longer to get her face above the surface. The sun was setting when something massive brushed against my leg. Through the clear water, I saw it. A tiger shark, at least 12 feet long, circling directly beneath us. The fin broke the surface 20 feet away, then disappeared, then came up again at 10 feet. It bumped me harder the second time, its sandpaper skin tearing through my wetsuit and into my calf. Blood immediately clouded the water around us. The shark began circling faster, tighter, and I could see its dead black eye as it passed. I tried to punch it when it came close, but my fist just bounced off, tearing my knuckles open and adding more blood to the water. Then, the shark disappeared completely. For 5 seconds, nothing but silence. I looked down and saw it rising fast from below, mouth starting to open, rows of teeth visible. We were about to be eaten alive on our honeymoon. The shark shot up like a rocket, and its teeth clamped down on my ankle with crushing force. Pain exploded through my leg as those razor teeth went straight through my wetsuit into flesh. I twisted hard and kicked its eye with my free foot as hard as I could. The shark's grip loosened for a second, and I yanked my leg free, blood pouring out in a dark cloud. It circled back immediately while I pulled Elena higher against my chest, my ankle throbbing and bleeding badly. I grabbed the bright yellow safety sausage from my BCD and wrapped it around Elena's torso as fast as I could. My hands shook so bad I could barely tie the knots, but I got it secured around her chest and under her arms. The shark bumped us again, way harder this time, its rough skin scraping my back raw, but it seemed confused by the weird yellow thing wrapped around Elena and backed off a few feet. I fumbled for my dive knife strapped to my leg, my fingers numb and clumsy from exhaustion. When the shark came close again, I slashed at the water, making as many bubbles and as much noise as possible. The blade cut through nothing but water, but the commotion made the shark retreat temporarily. Those few seconds let me think while I held Elena's unconscious body against me with one arm. Then I remembered reading something about sharks being sensitive to electrical fields from their prey. I dug frantically through my BCD pockets with my free hand, stuff floating away into the water. My dive computer was still attached to my wrist, the screen still glowing faintly. When the shark came at us again, I pressed the computer right against its snout as it approached. The shark jerked away violently like it had been shocked and disappeared into the deeper water. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting everything orange and red. I knew once it got dark we were done for because I wouldn't see the shark coming anymore. My legs could barely move, just tiny kicks to keep us from sinking completely. I pulled the octopus hose from my regulator and tied Elena to me, wrapping it around both our waists. If I passed out now, we'd both sink together, but at least I wouldn't lose her in the dark. The knots took forever with my torn-up hands, but I got us connected. Complete darkness fell within minutes, and suddenly I couldn't see anything at all. The shark was still there, though, because I felt it brush past my legs every few minutes. Each time my whole body tensed up, waiting for the bite that didn't come. I started talking to Elena constantly, telling her about our wedding day 6 months ago, how beautiful she looked walking down that beach in her white dress, how we danced until 3 in the morning and her dad cried during his speech. My voice was the only thing keeping me awake through the burning pain in my ankle and shoulder. Hours passed in total blackness, with only the sound of waves slapping against us. My own breathing sounded so loud and ragged in my ears. Elena's body temperature had dropped, so much she felt like ice against my chest. I pressed her as close as I could, trying to share whatever warmth I had left. But I was getting cold too, that deep cold that comes from inside your bones. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue and tasted blood. The waves kept washing over our faces, and I had to constantly adjust Elena's position to keep her airway clear. At some point I saw a small light way off in the distance, maybe a boat or a plane. I tried to blow the whistle attached to my BCD, but my lips were so swollen and cracked I couldn't make a seal. The pathetic wheeze that came out wouldn't have been heard 10 feet away. The light moved across the horizon and disappeared, taking my hope with it. I kept talking to Elena anyway, describing the house we were going to buy next year, the big kitchen she wanted, and the garden where we'd grow tomatoes. My voice got weaker until I was just whispering against her ear. Dawn started breaking finally, and I could see Elena's face for the first time in hours. Her skin was gray like ash, and her breathing was so shallow, I pressed my ear to her chest. Her heart was still beating, but barely, these tiny flutters that scared me more than the shark. The shark itself was gone, but I spotted more fins about 100 meters away. 3 or 4 of them cutting through the water in lazy circles. They hadn't come closer yet, but they knew we were there. Back on shore in Colombia, Pilar Garza was just getting to her office at the Port Authority. She found a delayed report on her desk about 2 missing divers from yesterday afternoon. The dive shop owner had finally called it in after realizing his boat came back with 2 empty spots. Pilar immediately started mapping out current patterns on her computer, calculating where we might have drifted overnight. She divided the search area into zones and started calling every fishing boat captain she knew. Within an hour, she had 8 boats heading out to different sectors. She stayed on the radio coordinating their movements and adjusting the search pattern based on wind data. None of us in the water knew any of this was happening, of course. All I knew was Elena needed help soon or she wouldn't make it. The sun was getting higher, and Elena's face was turning red from the exposure, so I pulled off my wetsuit top with shaking hands. My fingers kept slipping on the zipper, but I finally got it off and tried to tie it around the safety sausage to make some shade. The yellow tube kept bobbing away in the waves, and I had to grab it 3 times before I could wrap the black neoprene around it. I held it over Elena's face, my arms burning from keeping them raised, but at least her skin wasn't in direct sunlight anymore. The waves kept spinning us around in circles, and I couldn't tell which direction we were drifting. Elena's weight belt was still clipped to her BCD, so I unclipped it and let it sink down about 10 feet on the octopus hose. The weight dragged below us like an anchor, and suddenly we weren't spinning as much. That's when I saw it. Way off on the horizon, a huge cargo ship moving across the water. I waved the safety sausage as high as I could reach, but the ship was miles away and getting smaller. My throat made this weird croaking sound when I tried to yell. Back in Colombia, Christian Lopez was sitting in a small office at the Port Authority, his hands shaking as he talked to the investigator. He kept saying he thought everyone was on board, that the weather was getting bad, and he needed to get back fast. The investigator wrote down how Christian never used a clipboard for head counts, just looked around and guessed. Elena's breathing changed. These long pauses between breaths that made my chest tight with fear. I pressed my hand on her chest and pushed down, then again, trying to help her lungs work. Each push took strength I didn't have, but I kept going, counting out loud to keep rhythm. Her lips were turning blue, and I pushed harder, feeling her ribs bend under my palm. 20 minutes later, I heard an engine and turned to see a fishing boat, maybe 300 meters away. I grabbed the whistle on my BCD and blew as hard as I could, but the wind was blowing the wrong way. The boat kept going straight, never changing course, and I watched it get smaller and smaller until it was gone. My eyes burned from the salt and disappointment. Pilar Garza was looking at her computer screen, drawing new lines on the search map based on overnight currents. She called a cargo ship captain on the radio and asked him to change course by just 2 degrees. Every boat she could reach was now looking for anything yellow in the water. She had 8 boats in different zones and kept adjusting their paths based on wind and current data. A plastic bottle floated past us and I grabbed it, biting off the cap with my teeth. I wedged it under Elena's chin to keep her head tilted back so water wouldn't go in her nose. Such a small thing, but it meant I could use both hands to tread water for a few minutes. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and every kick sent pain shooting up to my hips. Something pecked my head hard, and I looked up to see seabirds circling above us. One dove down and pecked my scalp again, drawing blood. I splashed water at them, but my splashes were weak, and they kept coming. Another bird got my hand when I tried to cover Elena's face, its beak tearing the skin between my thumb and finger. The blood in the water was attracting them, and I couldn't make them stop. The current felt different suddenly, pulling us sideways instead of straight out. Neither of us knew it, but we were drifting toward the edge of the search zone Pilar had drawn on her map. If we crossed that invisible line, the boats would actually have a chance of spotting us. I held Elena close and started talking about the house I wanted us to buy, describing the big windows in the living room that would let in morning light. I told her about the kitchen with the island where we'd make breakfast on Sundays, and the bedroom with space for a king-size bed. My voice was just a whisper now, but I kept talking about the backyard where we'd plant a garden, tomatoes and peppers like her mom grew. I described the bathroom with the big tub where she could take those long baths she loved, and the spare room we'd turn into an office. The cold was deep in my bones now, making my whole body shake. I couldn't feel my feet anymore and my hands were going numb. Elena's weight kept pulling us under and I had to kick harder to keep us up. The safety sausage was still standing up above us, bright yellow against the blue sky, but my eyes kept closing, without me meaning to. I bit my tongue hard to stay awake, tasting blood again. The birds were getting bolder, landing on the water near us and pecking at our exposed skin. I tried to grab one, but my hand moved too slow and it flew away. Elena made a small sound, not quite a moan, and I pressed my ear to her chest again. Her heart was still beating, but so weak I could barely feel it. I kept talking about the house, about the front porch where we'd sit in the evenings, about the driveway where we'd park 2 cars someday. My lips were so cracked that every word hurt, but I couldn't stop talking because if I stopped, I might close my eyes and not open them again. The water slapped my face again and I jerked awake, realizing I'd blacked out for a second. Elena's weight pulled us both under, and I kicked hard to get us back up, my legs barely responding anymore. Miles away on shore, a fisherman squinted at something yellow he thought he saw flash between the waves. He grabbed his radio and called it into the Coast Guard station, where Pilar was coordinating the search. She immediately redirected 3 boats to that area, marking new coordinates on her map. I didn't know any of this was happening. All I knew was that my vision kept going dark around the edges, and I had to shake my head hard to stay awake. Elena needed me conscious to keep her face out of the water. The safety sausage kept falling over in the waves, so I fumbled with numb fingers to tie it to Elena's tank valve. It finally stood straight up, making us visible from much further away than before. Back at the police station, investigators were grilling Christian about the missing divers. They asked him why his boat didn't have emergency radios, and he admitted he couldn't afford them, that he was trying to save money by cutting corners on safety equipment. The investigator wrote everything down while Christian sweated through his shirt. Out in the ocean, I thought I saw a boat heading toward us, but I'd been fooled by mirages before. Still, I used what little strength I had left to wave the safety sausage back and forth. The fisherman adjusted his course based on wind direction and suddenly spotted the yellow marker clearly. He radioed the exact coordinates to Pilar while pushing his engine to full speed. I watched the boat getting bigger, actually getting bigger this time, not disappearing like the others. Hands reached down and pulled me up, but I couldn't speak, could only point at Elena still in the water. They hauled her aboard, and someone immediately started CPR, while another person wrapped blankets around my shaking body. The boat turned toward shore, racing through the waves while the crew worked on Elena with an oxygen mask. She coughed up water, and her eyes moved under her eyelids but wouldn't open. I crawled across the deck to her, ignoring the crew telling me to stay still. The shore got closer, and I could see ambulances waiting at the dock with their lights flashing. When we pulled up, the medics rushed aboard, but I wouldn't let go of Elena's hand even as they tried to move her to a stretcher. They had to work around me, checking her vitals and starting an IV while I held on. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical equipment. At the hospital, they pushed us into the emergency room where doctors immediately started pumping us full of fluids through multiple IVs. A nurse cleaned the jellyfish stings on my shoulder and Elena's arm, applying some kind of cream that made the burning stop for the first time in hours. They discovered Elena had breathed in seawater, so they had to push a tube down her throat to help her breathe. The machine made a steady whooshing sound as it pushed air into her lungs. My own IV bag emptied fast, and they hung another one, then another. The doctor kept asking me questions, but my throat was too swollen to answer. I just kept pointing at Elena, trying to make them understand she needed help more than me. They moved me to a regular room after a few hours, but I couldn't rest. Every few minutes I asked the nurses about Elena, and they kept saying the same thing, that she was stable but critical. That didn't tell me if she was going to be okay. Pilar came to visit that evening with a notebook and recorder. She wanted my statement about what happened, but I kept falling asleep mid-sentence. I managed to explain about the dive shop not doing a head count, about Christian leaving without checking if everyone was aboard. She wrote everything down and said they were building a case against him. The next morning, a nurse came running to get me. Elena was awake and asking for me. I practically ran down the hall in my hospital gown, dragging my IV pole behind me. She looked terrible, her face swollen and blistered from the sun, but her eyes were open and she recognized me. She couldn't talk because of the breathing tube, but she squeezed my hand. The doctor explained she had pneumonia from the seawater in her lungs and would need to stay in intensive care for at least another week. The news about what happened to us spread through the local diving community fast. Other divers came forward saying Christian had done the same thing to them, leaving people behind and not following safety protocols. His dive shop was shut down immediately pending the investigation. Elena's condition got worse before it got better. The pneumonia turned severe, and they had to increase her oxygen. I slept in the chair beside her bed every night, waking up whenever her monitors beeped. The nurses brought me food, but I couldn't eat much. All I could think about was how close we'd come to dying on what was supposed to be our honeymoon. Lawyers showed up at the hospital 2 days later with business cards and promises about getting us millions, but I couldn't focus on anything they said because Elena's fever had spiked to 104, and the doctors were pumping her full of antibiotics. The lawyers kept talking about negligence and liability, while I watched Elena's chest rise and fall with the ventilator, counting each breath to make sure the machine was still working. I signed whatever papers they put in front of me just to make them leave, so I could get back to Elena's room. The nurses moved me to a regular room on the 3rd floor, but I kept sneaking back to the ICU every hour to check on Elena, asking the same questions about her oxygen levels and blood pressure until they started recognizing me and just shaking their heads before I could speak. That evening, Pilar came to my room with a notebook and a small recorder, asking me to explain everything that happened from the beginning. My throat was still raw and swollen, but I managed to tell her about Christian never doing a head count, about how the boat left without checking if everyone was aboard, about the missing safety equipment. She wrote down every detail, asking me to repeat parts when I started dozing off mid-sentence from the pain medication. The next morning, they finally took Elena off the ventilator, and her eyes opened for the first time in 3 days. She couldn't talk at first, just squeezed my hand and looked confused about where we were, but she knew who I was, and that was enough to make me break down crying right there in front of the nurses. The doctor explained that she didn't remember anything after the jellyfish sting, which was probably better because she didn't have to relive those final hours in the water. Word spread fast through the diving community about what happened to us, and within hours, Christian's dive shop was shut down by the authorities. Other divers started coming forward with their own stories about his unsafe practices, about times he'd almost left them behind or sent them down with faulty equipment. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in the area knew about the American couple who'd been abandoned at sea. Elena's pneumonia got worse before it got better, her lungs filling with fluid from all the seawater she'd swallowed. They moved her back to intensive care, and I slept in the chair beside her bed, waking up every time her monitors beeped or a nurse came to check on her. For a week straight, I lived on the hospital cafeteria, food and instant coffee, showering in the small bathroom attached to her room, and wearing the same clothes the hospital had given me. The lawyers kept calling, wanting to discuss strategy and settlement options, but I couldn't think about lawsuits when Elena was still fighting to breathe on her own. They sent more papers to sign and left voicemails about depositions and evidence, but all I cared about was watching Elena's oxygen numbers slowly improve each day. 3 weeks after the rescue, we were finally cleared to fly home, and the airline upgraded us to first class when they heard our story from the gate agent. Elena was still weak, needing a wheelchair through the airport, and I had to help her to the bathroom twice during the flight. The flight attendants kept bringing us water and checking if we needed anything, probably worried we'd have some kind of medical emergency at 30,000 feet. Back home in Ohio, everything felt strange and unfamiliar after what we'd been through. We started therapy right away for the PTSD, sitting in separate rooms talking to counselors about the nightmares and panic attacks. Elena also had to do physical therapy 3 times a week for the nerve damage from the jellyfish stings, working to regain feeling in her left arm. I went with her to every appointment, watching her struggle through exercises that should have been simple, like picking up a tennis ball or holding a pencil. The therapist said the venom had damaged the nerves, and it would take months to know if the feeling would fully return. At home, I jumped every time I heard water running or waves on TV, my body tensing up like I was back in the ocean. Elena couldn't take baths anymore, only quick showers, and even then she'd sometimes start hyperventilating and I'd have to help her out. We moved our bedroom to the 2nd floor because being on the ground level made her feel like she was drowning. Neither of us could look at the ocean documentaries we used to love or even drink water without thinking about those hours of desperate thirst. 2 months after the incident, Elena went back to work part-time at the bank, just 4 hours a day to start. Her co-workers had decorated her desk with flowers and welcome back signs, but she called me crying on her lunch break the first day because someone asked her about the trip. We were learning to help each other through the bad moments, developing signals for when one of us was starting to panic, finding ways to ground ourselves in the present instead of getting pulled back to that day. The physical therapy was helping, and Elena could finally write again, though her handwriting was shaky and uneven. I'd gone back to my job at the accounting firm, but couldn't concentrate on spreadsheets when my mind kept replaying those hours in the water. Then we got a call from Pilar with news about Christian's case. He'd received a suspended license and a large fine, but no jail time, the judge deciding that losing his business was punishment enough. The prosecutor said it was the best outcome we could hope for given the laws in Colombia and the fact that we'd survived. It felt completely unfair that he could nearly kill us through negligence and walk away with just a fine, but we were too exhausted to fight for more. The lawyers handling our civil case said we could pursue it further, but it would mean going back to Colombia for depositions and possibly a trial, something neither of us could handle yet. 2 weeks later, Elena walked into our living room holding a brochure from the community center and dropped it on my lap while I was watching TV. She'd circled the adult swimming classes in red marker and written "We're doing this" across the top. I looked up at her standing there with her arms crossed. That determined look on her face I knew meant there was no point arguing. The next Monday we drove to the pool together, both of us quiet in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Walking into that chlorine smell hit me like a punch to the gut, and I had to stop in the doorway for a second to breathe. Elena grabbed my hand and pulled me forward to the shallow end, where 6 other adults were already standing around looking nervous. The instructor, a college kid named Tyler, had us start by just walking back and forth across the 3-foot section, getting comfortable being in water again. Elena's whole body was shaking the first time she stepped in, but she kept going, jaw clenched tight. We went twice a week after that, Tuesday and Thursday evenings after work. Tyler kept telling us we were his most dedicated students, not knowing why we both pushed ourselves so hard to go from the shallow end to the deep end 4-foot section, to finally swimming laps in the deep end. By the 6th week, Elena could do a full lap of freestyle without stopping, and I could tread water for 10 minutes without panicking. 3 months after Colombia, we were both sleeping through the night again, without waking up gasping for air or checking that the other person was still breathing. Elena's arm had full feeling back, and the nerve damage the doctors worried about never showed up. The shark bite scars on my leg had faded to thin white lines that you'd only notice if you knew to look for them. We decided to write about what happened to us after a friend suggested it might help other divers. I typed up our story on my laptop, while Elena sat next to me, filling in details I'd forgotten, like how the safety sausage had started deflating before the rescue, or how she'd hallucinated seeing her dead grandmother in the water. Scuba Life magazine picked it up and ran it as their cover story with the headline, "Left Behind, a Honeymoon Survival Story." They used it to push for better safety standards and mandatory emergency beacons on all dive boats. 4 months after the rescue, we drove down to Lake Erie and walked along the beach at sunset. Elena kicked off her sandals and let the small waves wash over her feet while I stood next to her, ready to pull her back if she needed it. She squeezed my hand and told me she was glad we'd made it through together, that she couldn't imagine surviving without me. There. We stood there for 20 minutes just watching the water, not talking, both of us knowing this was a huge step forward. That night over dinner, Elena pulled out her laptop and showed me mountain resorts in Colorado she'd been researching for our do-over honeymoon. We picked a cabin near Aspen with a hot tub on the deck and views of the peaks, about as far from the ocean as we could get. The next week, Elena went to the craft store and bought a shadow box frame and asked me to get the torn safety sausage from the garage where I'd thrown it. She mounted it in the frame, along with our hospital bracelets and a photo of us from the day before the dive, all smiling and clueless about what was coming. She hung it in our hallway where we'd see it every day, a reminder, she said, of the worst thing that ever happened to us, and proof that we survived it. Life started feeling normal again in small ways, like when we cooked spaghetti together on a random Wednesday, and Elena laughed so hard at a stupid commercial that sauce splattered on the stove. We'd been through hell in that ocean, lost everything, including almost our lives, but somehow we'd come out the other side different but still together. The nightmares were mostly gone, and the therapy sessions had dropped to once a month. Elena had even started talking about maybe trying scuba again someday, though definitely not in Colombia, and definitely with the most expensive, safety-obsessed dive shop we could find. I wasn't ready for that yet, but seeing her even consider it showed me how far we'd both come from those hours in the water when death felt certain. Thanks for hanging out with me through all this wondering and questioning. Really means a lot. I'll catch you next time, wherever curiosity takes us. Like the video, it helps more than you think.